discrimination against Quakers reversed. So we're going to reread section 202. I'll read. And the priests and the professors, they prophesied mightily against us about this time. For before they prophesied, we should all be knocked down within a month, as aforesaid. Then after they prophesied within half a year, and their prophecies not coming to pass, they prophesied that we would eat one another out. For many times after the meetings, many tender people had a great way to go, and the houses not having beds, they stayed at the houses and lay in the hay mows. And Cain's fear possessed them, that when we had eaten one another out, we should all come to be maintained of the parishes ere long, and that they would be troubled with us. But after this, when they saw that the Lord blessed and increased friends, as he did Abraham, both in the field and in the basket, and at their goings forth and comings in, risings up and layings down, and that all things began to be blessed unto them, then they saw the failings of all these their prophecies, and that it was in vain to curse where God had blessed. Let's hear from David.
Thank you. I just want to make sure I understand in that last sentence. It's very long. I'm not sure what the reference is to Abraham. I think I remember that he was blessed with the promise of progeny, as many as there were stars in the sky or something. But I think here in talking about blessed and increased in the field and in the basket, would that have to do with their food supplies? Because the earlier concern was that these people were going to run out of resources on their own and would become wards of the parish.
So this is where that context comes up that I put in the invite from Deuteronomy 28.
Okay.
Where the Abrahamic blessing would be that they would be blessed when they get up and when they go to bed, when they lay down, when they go in and when they go out, that their field would be blessed. But I also want to point attention to verse 9, that God would establish that for them a holy people unto himself, that would fulfill the commandments of God. And so I think Fox is definitely alluding to Deuteronomy 28 here, because there's no other way about it, I think. And he's looking at the early Quakers being a fulfillment of God's promises that God fulfills within them in a huge way.
I just want to note in that last phrase that those who had been criticizing the Quakers, persecuting and prophesying that they would be a flash in the pan, they would, be gone pretty soon. They saw that their prophecies had failed, and that was being to curse where God had blessed. But it doesn't say they became convinced of truth. It's just they said, okay, that prophecy is gone. So we don't know. I mean, maybe we'll get it in subsequent paragraphs, but this may or may not have been the end of those particular folks, priests and professors. Professors, by the way, meaning not like we would use it, people who lecture in colleges, but those who profess a particular doctrine. And Fox would say they were professors, but not possessors. They didn't have the truth. They all of them too. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, David. And over to Bev.
I've been thinking about this kind of, I don't know how Fox found out that they were saying these negative things about them, but how powerful was Fox's message or practices that others had to respond by putting them down? Like if people are just saying stuff and you don't like it, so you just ignore it. That's not what happened, when the colonizers came to Turtle Island. That's not what happens here. It's as if truth is so powerful that it has to be put down. So I find that interesting. And what Fox is talking about later on, about how they managed to get on, to me is like the indigenous way of trusting that if you live rightly, things will be given, food will be given. The animals, the plants are seen as giving themselves. So that idea that people had to actually say negative things about other people is fascinating to me, that somehow it must be the truth if people are so frightened by it.
Thank you, Bev. And let's hear from Madeline.
You're muted, Madeline,
muted.
so you unmute.
Thank you. He was going into places of worship and taking over the pulpit and many other things that was quite hard to ignore, and drawing dozens, hundreds, thousands of people. So I think you're right, Bev, in identifying that as his power. The one thing I would say a little differently from what you said was that Native Americans and many other cultures and peoples, including many of our Protestant friends, feel that all will be right if we do the right things. And I think the core of Fox's and the early Christians' message was more, all will be well if you obey God. A little different, that God is first and behavior is second. That's how I read it.
Yeah, part of that Deuteronomy 28 verses that I put in the invite, I quoted in there so you wouldn't have to spend time looking it up. The very first thing is listening to God. And some translate the listening as obeying, but I like having them as separate things. Why? Because I think it's the listening to God that enables and empowers the obeying part. The alignment of our hearts that is done by God when we let ourselves experience Him. Listening being one form of that. I usually like looking or experiencing. There's some people hear God, some people see things from God, and other people just sense God. And I think that's all good, each and every one of those things. But it's when we experience Him that I find that I am transformed. My heart is aligned by God to be like His, and we become children of God, as the phrase that's in the Bible, which means more than just what we are born with, in such a way that all our children are God, but we become children of God that are exactly like Him. And so our hearts become moved by the power of infinite love instead of anything else. And I've encountered the same kind of phenomenon that people are talking about, that when an absolute good is birthed into the world, it seems that those that are still stuck in their own righteousness, in religion, which is a form of righteousness or godliness that isn't very godly. It doesn't produce the fruit of God, but some people think is godly, such as the Pharisees with Jesus, right? Jesus is birthing an infinite good into the world by following everything that he hears his Father saying and sees his Father doing. And there's a reaction from people that are just caught up in a form. They're just professing a religion, but they don't possess what the religion points to, that is God and knowing God. And Jesus bemoaned them. He said, the kingdom of God is within you, but you won't come to me that I might heal you. You don't recognize the power that the scriptures are telling about, because if you did, then you would come to me and I would give you life. And so there's that infinite source of life that when we let ourselves experience it, that it aligns our hearts with his, our minds, our hearts, and our desires. All three. But when, because one of the distinctions of early Quakers is this idea of ongoing revelation, that God is still talking, he's still revealing, he's still moving in this earth. But I've seen people that are moving by that ethic, and then I see the people in religion that would rise up against it. They have to oppose it. And even if they didn't really believe in prophesying, they would start prophesying doom against these, what they thought were false prophets, but were true prophets of God. And then their prophecies, the false prophets, would turn out false. And New Testament scripture says, and Old Testament, if the prophet prophesies something and it doesn't come to pass, do not listen to that person anymore. And so Fox would be very motivated to point out, these are the false prophecies of the false prophets. And do not listen to them anymore is supposed to be the lesson that we're supposed to take from it. Lynn?
Thank you. I'm uncomfortable with this passage because while the lesson may be don't listen to false prophets, there is another lesson that he's putting forward that doesn't seem very Fox-like to me and can be really badly misconstrued. And that is, as Madeline said, if you do the right things, all will be right if you obey God. There's an implication here that you're going to have a full basket and your fields are going to be flourishing. And if you're good and obey God, you'll be given things. It's kind of like the prosperity church, those big churches in the States, that if you say, if you're really good and God likes you, you'll get rich. And I just don't think this is what Fox is about at all. I think he's about obedience. And it may be that if you're obedient, then all is right in the world, but it may not mean burgeoning fields and full baskets. And I just don't like this passage. I think it can easily lead people off in a direction that doesn't seem in sync with Fox's other messages.
Thank you, Lynn. And let's go to Bev.
Well, two things. One is about discerning whether what someone is saying is true or not. And I just want to point out, I haven't seen the little woodpecker for a very long time, but when Shadow started talking, it's here, busy, feeding, and that always means to me it's about the practice. So thank you, Shadow and Lynn. I sent a comment, which I won't be able to remember all of it, but it was about what Lynn is talking about. And the issue of cursing and blessing and what is, it's not that Okay, so the example that I found, which is from some Jewish teaching, this man comes to his rabbi and says, I'm poor, my wife is nagging me, I can't find work, my life is so horrible, blah, 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 blah. The rabbi sends him to see another person who has the same situation. And when he comes to this other person's house and comes in, he explains, he says, my rabbi sent me to you because you are suffering like I'm suffering. And the man looks at him and he said, I'm not suffering, I'm happy. So it's not the situation, it's our perspective on it. And I think what he's saying here is, you'll be happy. It doesn't matter about your physical, emotional situation. You'll be joyous if you listen. And yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Bev. This reminds me of the quote by Julian of Norwich, and I think I might have shared this last time. All shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of thing shall be well. And I remember when my sister introduced me to that quite a number of years ago, I resisted that. And I said, no. I can't embrace that message because I don't believe that all things are well. And over time, I've wondered if what this really means is that maybe on a level that I can't discern, all shall be well. That there's a wellness on, and I don't know if order is the right word, but there's something there that maybe in the big picture of God's world that all shall be well and all is well. And I'm looking at this all shall be well. That's future, isn't it? Future. Bev, and then David.
I just wanted to comment on that in the Buddhist tradition and other traditions, like Thich Nhat Hanh is, breathing in, I know I'm breathing in, breathing out, I know I'm breathing out. At this moment, all is well. Because I'm breathing, because it's ruach, it's spirit, all is well. It doesn't matter what's going on in the world, doesn't matter what's going on in me. At this moment, all is well.
Thank you, Bev. That's lovely. And David?
Well, we're dealing with some deep things that have been eternal challenges. And on the face of it, it might seem like there's a proposition here that if you do good, you will get blessings, kind of a tit for tat thing. God's keeping score. And I'm pretty sure that Fox and others knew it was a little more subtle than that. In the immediate story, there are those who thought that the Quakers were going to flop because they would devour their own resources and become a problem for the non-friends, in the parish welfare system. And that didn't get, that in itself was not true. But I don't think that implies that our good works or our faithfulness, that we can create results out of that there's a particular lever we pull and then the goodies come pouring forth. These things have to be seen in God's time and the kairos and the divine economy in which the relation of cause and effect may be way beyond our own sense of time. And when we act in faithfulness, that requires faith. It doesn't demand immediate results. I'm glad when there are folks who can say in the face of adversity, all is well. It is well with my soul. I think there was a song there that was written by a person who just lost his wife and children. So it sounds paradoxical, but I think it invites us to look beyond the troubles and disappointments and tribulations of the moment and really, cast our lot with our creator, sustainer, who is ultimate good. And it doesn't free us from the entanglement of the world, which in the short run really can beat us down. And I think that's what the life of faith and in community, I'm not talking about just an individual person. We lift each other up in these times of loss and disappointment, disillusionment. So it's an ongoing dynamic, but it's not an immediate tit for tat.
Anything further on this section? Ready to move on to 203? Seeing a few nods there. And Lynn, would you be in a position of reading?
Thank you, Donna. Yes, I'd love to. But at the first convincement, when friends could not put off their hats to people, nor say you to a particular, but thee and thou, and could not bow, nor use the world's salutations, nor fashions, nor customs. Many friends, being tradesmen of several sorts, lost their custom at the first, for the people would not trade with them, nor trust them. And for a time, friends that were tradesmen could hardly get enough money to buy bread. But afterwards, people came to see friends' honesty and truthfulness, and yea and nay at a word in their dealing, and their lives and conversations did preach and reach to the witness of God in all people. And they knew and saw that for conscience sake toward God, they would not cozen and cheat them. And at last that they might send any child and be as well used as themselves at any of their shops.
Maybe we should read 204 too, because it seems to be a continuation of this.
Lynn, would you be able to carry on?
So then things altered, so that all the inquiry was, where was a draper or shopkeeper or tailor or shoemaker or any other tradesman that was a Quaker? Insomuch that friends had double the trade beyond any of their neighbors. And if there was any trading, they had it. Insomuch that then the cry of all the professors and others was, if we let these people alone, they will take the trading of the nation out of our hands. And this hath been the Lord's doing to his people. My desire is that all may be kept in his power and spirit, faithful to God and man. First to God in obeying him in all things, and secondly, in doing unto all men that which is just and righteous, true and holy and honest. To all men and women in all things that they have to do with or to deal with all with them. And that the Lord God may be glorified in their practicing truth, holiness, godliness, and righteousness amongst them in all their lives and conversations.
Thank you, Lynn. Let's hear from David.
I may be repeating what friends know already. And I don't know if the brand called Quaker Oats is sold on both sides of the border. People, the only thing they know about Quakers is that picture of the rather well-off, well-fed gentleman on the front of the Quaker Oats box. It was very cynical appropriation of that image, and it was at the time of consolidation of a lot of industries and these different the different trusts. There was the steel trust and the coal trust and the oil trust, and there was an oats trust. And with the what was called the Sherman Antitrust Act, I mean, the populist revolt against this monopoly power, at least the Oats Trust wanted to clean up their image. So they adopted the picture, the image, and the name of Quaker. Not that any of them had a Quaker connection as far as I know, but the reputation for honesty and wholesomeness and fair dealing and all these things that are described here. Whether that happens in other commercial arrangements or not, I don't know. We actually have an old Quaker whiskey. Whether that's because there were some Quakers who were good at booze making, or whether again it was that subconscious image of goodliness. Okay, you can drink this whiskey, but maybe you won't get drunk or die of it. Who knows? And it's good to see where this came from.
Thank you, David. And let's hear from Bev.
I was reading something this week in a Quaker. I don't know how I got to it, but it was about Bob's Red Mill products that are all organic, and that I think he's a Quaker and the kinds of things he's doing. Anyway, I need a bit of an explanation about the beginning here, because I don't quite understand what friends were doing that made people not trust them, that they weren't greeting in the same way, and why that was happening. If someone could explain that, thank you.
David?
I hesitate to speak too much, but welcome somebody else answering this question, if they want to go before me. I think that the connection here is under the broad heading of Friend's testimony of integrity. And in the latter part, it's the integrity of business dealings. But in the earlier part, it has to do with the forms of address, the refusal to use terms that were flattering, which at least at that point, the plural you rather than the singular thee was a way of honoring somebody of supposedly greater stature. We still have little remnants of this, the imperial we, which the Pope uses. Goes back to when there were two different emperors in the Roman Empire, one in Constantinople and one in Rome. And when one would speak, it was presumably for both of them. But there was really a radical rejection of anything that seemed to imply that some people had a natural born status that was greater than others. And there's some wonderful essays written about the Friend's testimony on integrity. Several of them are in Pendle Hill pamphlets. I think Wilmer Cooper, in his essay, says that all of the other testimonies really are expressions of a basic one of integrity, of wholeness. The refusal to swear oaths. It was plainness. It was a lack of ostentation, but basically it was an honesty. And then to find honest tradespeople who cared about the well-being of their customers and had some sense of equity and social equality, well, that's good for business. So sometimes I've heard this little flippant phrase that Friends came to North America, to do good, and they did well.
Thank you, David. Madeline?
Yeah, I think David gave the good context for it, but I imagine it was something like just feeling like these storekeepers were so rude. Like if we went into a store today and instead of being greeted with a polite, hello, how are you? How can I help you? Walk into the store and somebody says, hey, you. I mean, I bet it kind of sounded like that to their ears to not have that polite greeting. So like, why would I come back to your shop?
For me, I see it as what God produces within us. And then the more that we experience him, the more our hearts are aligned with him, that produces the testimonies or the spices. If we try and produce the spices of the testimonies on our own or in our own strength and understanding, then that's not going to produce the same thing. For one, our hearts aren't going to be aligned with the infinite heart of love. But we're not even we're not even able to conceive of the infinite goodness of God, let alone try and imitate. If we're just imitating what we think goodness is and love is and community is and equality is, I'm not sure that we can ever produce those things in infinite quality and quantity. Just like the fruit of the Spirit, it's really the Spirit's fruit. It's not the fruit of us trying harder to produce them in our own conception. And so Fox, even in 204, he puts this obedience to God and this relationship with God first. And that's what produces in men's hearts honesty and truthfulness and integrity. to an infinite degree beyond even what we're able to conceive of, because it's God's integrity within us, his infinite love, infinite in width, length, and depth, each one of them beyond our comprehension and ability to conceive or hope for. So I think Fox sees these things as all derivative and outcomes of knowing God within, our teacher, our guide, and being in, some might not like the word submission, but in alignment with that by God. It's the fruit of God, not the fruit of trying to be righteous in our own strength, understanding, and look good. There's plenty of religious people that Fox here calls professors, and they're all trying to look good. They're all trying to, I remember talking to a fellow, right? And he says, "Oh, I want to be a good person." It's like, and in me, I could discern a slight difference in what he was saying. And for some reason, he could discern it at the same time I was discerning it. And he goes, "Let me correct that. I want to be seen as a good person." That's a very different motive. That's a very different source. And the purity of God is infinite, and everything he does within us is infinite and perfect. And so Fox says, this has been the Lord's doing. It's not our doing, it's the Lord's doing in his people, which goes back to that Deuteronomy 28, verse 9, where God is making his own people. And so that we don't, we try to produce a community and do things that are productive to community. But that might not be the same thing as when God produces community in us. Of course, friends are allowed to disagree. Bev?
I'm not disagreeing. I am just, I find it kind of overwhelming that, like, to witness to the witness of God in all people is, and this conscience sake towards God is like through their experience, they're going back to the correct way of being in community, where we take care of each other and we see each other as equals because we're all connected. We can see how we're all brothers and sisters, and that's the way we're supposed to be with each other. But the way of life then and now is to keep us separate and to make us always feel, oh, am I going to get what I need to survive? And I have to be nice to these people, or these people aren't going to be nice to me. I mean, I feel this all the time, whether it's my phone not working right or having to go get groceries. It's built into the system to keep us separate and not in community. So, of course, now, once people understand what they were doing, they're drawn to be with those people because that in our heart is what we really want in community, so that we're not in fear all the time and we're not separate. We're always connected. So thank you. It's been very helpful. Thank you.
Are we ready to move on to the next section? So
Maybe we could
have-
just display the 204 section or the end of this, and then people might
Okay.
want to comment on that section. Since
Okay.
it's not displayed, yeah.
Okay.
Friends, I have just taken up the invitation Todd has given us to look at Deuteronomy 28. It's quite detailed in saying all of the prosperity and blessings that will happen to the extent that they keep the right relationship with God rather than turning to other gods or idols. And it really is a kind of covenant relationship. I will do this so long as you do that. The lessons for today, I think, are always, what idols do we turn to? This is a setting of social relations. It isn't just individual behavior. What kind of a society? And when a society or its policies turn away from righteousness and equity and fairness, basic human decency, it's going to corrupt a whole lot of things. And there will be some cause and effect into a negative direction. So I'm reading this not just in terms of what's detailed in Deuteronomy 28 and what Fox is testifying to there, but also for us to kind of self-examine what are the social relationships here that are not within God's will and that will corrupt and undercut the wholeness and the well-being of a whole society.
One thing I found conspicuously absent in the bottom list there is the word love. But maybe all these things are the fruit of love. And often we think of holiness or righteousness as something quite different than love, but in the ethic of Jesus, they're not. Love is the fulfillment of all the law and all the prophets, which is echoed again by Paul and John and the rest of the scriptures. If we love people, won't we be honest with them and truthful and deal fairly with them and consider their good, not just our own? Love is the foundation of God's kind of community. If I wanted to make a community that was purely human based, I can form one very quickly on hate. Hate this group, hate that group. I think there would be a lot of people joining that community very quickly. But it's not the community of God, is it? It's something quite contrary. So if I love all people with the love of God, then these are the fruits. And that would include speaking up for them when they are oppressed, giving them a voice when they don't have a voice, or their voice is ignored or discounted. Love might be a very simple thing, but its outworking is in all areas of our lives. And I guess the same thing for holiness, which is love anyway.
Yeah, I could share. I think that when I'm around Quaker people, I find.
Ruth, your voice is faint.
Can you hear me now? Is it better?
Better. Can it be any
Yeah,
louder?
sorry, I had this. Um, Turn it up a bit. Yeah, I find that when I'm around Quaker people, it's a lot more relaxing. So I think that that would have been something that they would have felt as well. Peacefulness and sense of safety. And so as well as the shops being, people wanting to get a fair deal, I don't think it was just that. I don't think they went to the Quaker shops just because they would get the right amount for the right price. But I think it's bigger than that. And when I say Quaker people, I mean even you, that I'm here with today. But it's I don't feel as comfortable in other settings. So I think that people would find that something about that quite attractive, which is why their movement grew, because it's everyone wants to feel peaceful and safe.
I'm very glad that it's Spirit's fruit within us and not our fruit of us trying. But I note that those people who think that they're righteous by their own doing, they really delight that other people might be cursed by their not doing, their non-obedience. And Jesus had a different ethic. When he quotes the Old Testament, he actually cuts off the verses about cursing. So he proclaims the day or the year of God's favor, and he leaves off the very next part of it, which is the day of the Lord, which is a day of judgment and cursing and holding accountable. And I imagine a lot of religious people would get very mad for cutting off the cursing part and just leaving all the blessings. And Jesus said he came to redeem us, not to condemn us. But the self-righteous person really wants those other people out there that aren't performing as well as they are to be condemned, and that they would be blessed. But I don't think it's from our production whatsoever. I think it's God's production within us. which lets us enter his rest. It's a rest of us trying to perform to just receive that which God is providing within us. The Spirit's fruit, not the fruit of us. But it does take this willingness. I think that we're people spoke before about being satisfied within. And I think the more that we are open to Spirit, to experiencing that of God within us, the more the Spirit produces this within us. That's how it goes for me. And Fox is always saying it. And it's the Spirit within us that puts down works of darkness or desires of darkness. So we have this great and precious gift within us. Bev?
I just put a quote in the chat because I don't know why, but I go back to the professors and those people that are saying negative things about the Quakers. That is because they're suffering, that they need to, and they're in fear and they don't feel safety, that they have to do this negative behavior. Just makes me sad for some reason, but I can't do anything for anyone else. I can only look for that part of myself and help it transform.
I put in the chat, I think of those that some family systems or cultural systems, there's generational things that are not quite healthy. They're not quite loving. They're not quite how God would do things. And yet they're very entrenched. And then someone is born into that and they stop doing these things. And then maybe they even speak against those things. And usually they get a lot of flack and they get a lot of persecution from those who are still stuck in them. Still enslaved by those false practices. And yeah, they're based in fear.
Yeah.
Bev?
I think what sparked that is the the phrase, my desire is that all may be kept in his power and spirit, to me is like a prayer that we could all be using in whatever way fits for us. Because for me, when Fox says in obeying him, to me that is more like what Shadow mentioned earlier is listening and experiencing. Which is difficult to do when you're being led by your burden parts. So I really see this as a prayer.
Go ahead, David.
Well, there are a number of things I want to say, but I'm going to hold back because I see several friends from whom I'm not heard today, and I believe it would benefit us to hear what's working in the hearts of everyone here, if they want to share that.
Barbara?
Well, in reading these passages, I'm thinking of how far Quakers today have gotten away from these rigorous practices. There's a pamphlet, a Pendle Hill pamphlet called Trying to be Truthful by Shel Avery, which I have found very inspiring and challenging, because she applies the idea of truthfulness to everything we say, including things that I might say because I have that impression, or I heard somebody else say it, but I don't really know it myself, or it's an exaggeration. It just really was defining truth in a very complete and rigorous way, which I find very helpful. But it just, I think the need for a pamphlet like that is, in a sense, testament to how far away we've gotten from these aspirations of how we do live our lives.
Shall we move on to the next section? And I'm wondering, Sheila, would you be in a position of reading?
Sure.
Okay, so it just goes on to the next page, so I'll move it up here.
I've got to move the faces away from the text. After I was put out of Carlisle prison, I was moved to go to Priest Wilkinson's steeple house again, and was in the steeple house before him. And when he came in, I was declaring the truth to the people, and we had a meeting hard by where one Thomas Stubbs was declaring the word of life. So there were not many people in the steeple house. For the best and most of his hearers were turned to Christ's free teaching. The priest came in and opposed me, and there did we stay all the day. For when I began, he opposed me. And so if any law was broken, he brake it, for he thought to have wearied me out. And he shamed when his people were hailing me out, that we might see his fruits, which Christ spoke of. They shall hail you out of the synagogues, and then they would leave me alone. There did he stand till it was most night, jangling and opposing of me, and would not go to his dinner. But at last the Lord's power and truth came so over him that he packed away with his people. And so the Lord's power and truth came over them all. And after, I went to friends that were turned to the Lord into their meeting. And about this time, many of the steeple houses were empty, for such multitudes of people came to Christ's free teaching and knew their bodies, the temples of God.
Thank you, Sheila.
Okay.
Let's hear from Bev.
I need some clarification on the section that says, and he shamed when his people were hailing me out, that we might see his fruits, which Christ spoke of. They shall hail you out of the synagogues, and then they would leave me alone. Thank you.
Madeline?
Well, I'll take a stab at that. There are a couple of places in the book of John where reference is made to those who speak the truth, basically, that they'll be hauled out of the synagogues. These are Christ's words. Let me find that again. The first one is in John 9:22. This is after Jesus heals a blind man and his parents are hauled in to the authorities to say, you know, what was your son up to? Who was doing this? And they were afraid of being thrown out of the synagogue, so they wouldn't say, except he's of age, ask him. So I'm thinking, and I think there's a similar quote a little later in John. So I'm thinking this is about Fox was being recognized as speaking righteously. And Wilkinson basically shamed himself by hauling him out of the synagogue.
Yeah, John 16:2. They will put you out of the synagogue. In fact, the time is coming when anyone who kills you will think they are offering a service to God, which is quite ironic since that's what Saul, who became Paul, was involved doing in persecuting the early church. David?
Well, I'm not sure just how this verb is understood in 17th century English about hailing. Be hailed out, is it different than being hauled out? And in this case, it looks like rather than being thrown out, that he's being called out by others to come join them under the preaching, what calls the, you know, the free preaching, rather than the paid clergy. That people were hearing Thomas Stubbs and deserting the established church, which, you know, leaves Stubbs and, I'm sorry, what's the name, Wilkerson? Yeah, Wilkerson and Fox to debate with each other, probably to an empty audience. I just don't know what the dynamic of movement is here, but it appears that Fox isn't being, you know, violently ejected, but is going to where the people are. And it looks like the priest comes along with him. So when it says the Lord's power and truth came over them all, let's hope that that's Wilkerson as well.
Just before we go to Bev, I'm wondering if when the comment is being thrown out of synagogue, that's more significant than being or called out of synagogue is more significant at that time, because it perhaps relates to a membership in a synagogue, so that you would be then out of your community rather than just a building that represents certain religious practices.
So Johnson's English Dictionary, which I put a link to in the chat, defines hail as to be dragged by force, to pull violently and rudely. And so if there's any questions sometimes about words from the Old Testament or from 17th century, Johnson's dictionaryonline.com is a great resource. You need to search by the root of the word. So if it's hailed, you have to put it in hail to make it work. But there's also, since it's a verb, you have to go to the verb section of it, not just the noun. Bev?
So, okay, so this is the picture I have in my head, like I'm watching a movie, is that Wilkinson was arguing, but then he felt shamed when the people on his side started to drag him out of there. And so he stopped them and they left him alone. And then Wilkinson just kept arguing the way he was arguing until late into the night. And then they finally left. So that's the picture I have in my head, that for some reason, Wilkinson, it was okay for him to do what he was doing, but not for the people to go to that extent of ganging up on him. So there was something working away in Wilkinson from what I read into this. If anyone has other ideas, I'd love to hear.
Bev?
Question. Later on, at the end, when he finishes, and so the Lord's power and truth came over them all. Now, he's not saying they were all convinced. So I'm not quite sure what the meaning of that is. Whether it just finally stopped them from arguing with him and that's all it means, or they were okay with it. I don't know exactly what that means.
David?
Well, I don't think we can know exactly what happened, whether it was a unanimous conversion of everyone who was there. But my sense, when it says that that power came over them all, is that the situation, the group dynamic was changed. And then there were many who were turned to the Lord and joined friends in their meeting. But at least something happened that was different from how it started out. And I would like to think that there was a complete conversion of everyone who was there. But I'm satisfied to think that the tone of the
Oh, you muted there for a second. Can you repeat your last bit? And you have to unmute again, though. Sorry.
that at least there was no more violence or arguing. And I'm glad to see that there was a follow-up of a meeting under Quaker auspices.
David, what you've said reminds me of the sense of, as I have it, of a gathered meeting where there's something unsaid that people are in community, a little bit like what Ruth was talking about earlier, that when you are among friends, you feel peaceful, you feel a sense of trust. There's a felt sense about that experience. Bev and Madeline.
I just love the last part of the last sentence there. And you, their bodies, the temples of God, because to me, that's the whole practice. And it's quite wonderful. And it, after this whole event of a full day of this difficulty, it's just a lovely, peaceful, wonderful image.
That caught me too, Bev, that sense of it is in our bodies that we feel the experience of God. Madeline?
If I'm wrong, please correct me, but I think we're near the end of our time. Is that right? Yeah.
Yes.
And I was thinking about the question that Chado started us with, and I don't remember all of it, but part of it was, what is it that George is trying to teach us? What was the rest of it, Chado?
And spirit. And sometimes what is spirit saying to us newly from this passage?
Okay. And I think I would love to hear everybody, really everybody, comment on this, but I'll start off by saying, I think, as often is the case, he's saying something that I think of in the words of Martin Luther King Jr., how history arc is bending towards justice. And so it's not a prosperity gospel, but it's a justice gospel that he preaches and teaches over and over again. And it's manifested in the world before his very eyes.
I can speak from experience that sometimes when God is speaking through you, a truth that he wants to say, the opposers are shut up. They know it's true. Part of them still wants to oppose the truth, but they can't argue against it anymore because they know it's true. And so they can only stay silent or go away. And it said here that the priest and his followers went away. And that I take the next phrase to be all the rest of them were convinced of the truth and came to know that of God within themselves to be their teacher. It doesn't mean that another day they won't come and try and oppose again. Just in that moment, they know that it's true what God is saying through you and can't oppose anymore on that point.
Hi, Sheila. Over to Bev.
I really appreciate today's sections read. I realize that, I mean, it applies to what happened to George Fox in those days. It applies to what's going on in society. It applies to what's going on inside of me. And, you know, the people that were against him, he didn't give them a hard time. He treated them with respect. He just carried on. And that's what I have to learn with those parts in me that are burdened, that get angry or have these reactions to things going on in the world or to others, is to, okay, all right, but here's the truth. You know, I'll just let you go on. But I've learned a lot today about how I can deal with my own issues. So I really appreciate it.
Ginny.
Once again, I'm just struck by the courage of the early friends. They were just doing what they knew to be right. They could see through the conventions, the superficialities, and they just did what was right without thinking of the consequences. And that must have taken a lot of courage, especially at a time of persecution.
For me, each time we are together, I learn a little bit more about the Quaker experience, and I think about how I can discern that in myself as a part of my ongoing experience. I hear some messages over and over again. They're the same, and I need that. I need to hear certain gems of wisdom over and over again so that I can really integrate them into myself, so I can recognize them when I see them and hear them. And Madeline, I love your question. It's, for me, it's the taking the big picture of, so what did I get out of today? And I resonate with the other comments that have been shared. A little bit more insight, a little bit more understanding, a little bit more reinforcement of some of the key messages that were important to Fox and that are important to me.